People remember the disappearance of the Higgins family because there was nothing to explain. No screams, no violence, no struggle. Just four people, a house full of unfinished tea, and a silence that felt older than anything in Roxford. But what people don't talk about, what they feel but can't say, is that the house still answers the phone. The police disconnected the line decades ago. But sometimes, in the early hours before dawn, when the fog sinks low and the roads vanish into the hedges, the telephone in the old rectory rings. There is never a voice, just breath, measured, steady, almost mechanical. As if someone, or something, is waiting for a voice that no longer belongs to this world. And yet every few years, someone swears they hear children laughing in that empty house. A woman humming a church hymn no one sings anymore, or footsteps upstairs when the floorboard should be long rotted through. People forget things when they stand too close to the house. Names, faces, birthdays. It's as if the house demands something in return for letting you near. And once you've been there, it doesn't quite let you go. The Higgins family wasn't famous, not until they vanished. And even then, their story never made national news. Just whispers. A local radio segment here. A missing persons notice tucked into the classifieds there. By the time anyone noticed, it was already too late. Something had taken hold, not just of the family, but of the land itself. Something old, something waiting. The story doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with a photograph. Faded, sun-bleached, found decades later under a floorboard during restoration. It shows the four members of the Higgins family standing in front of their new home. A red, brick Victorian house with ivy crawling up one side and curtains drawn tightly across every window. Thomas stands tall, ex-military stiffness in his shoulders. Miriam at his side, pale, unsmiling. Elsie, the daughter, 17, already looking away from the camera, eyes focused somewhere to the left. And Sam, 12, staring directly at the lens, not blinking, not smiling. The photo is wrong. Not because of what's in it, but because of what isn't. There are no shadows beneath their feet. And behind them, in the upper bedroom window, is a figure none of the family ever mentioned. The house had been empty for 7 years before the Higgins family moved in. The previous owners left in the middle of the night, leaving furniture, dishes, even photographs on the walls. When asked why, the husband simply said, "It listens when you sleep." The property agent laughed it off, of course. Superstition. The English countryside is full of it. But what he failed to mention was that 3 tenants before them died in that house. One by accident, one by illness, and one by drowning. In the upstairs bedroom, with no water in sight. Thomas Higgins wasn't the sort to believe in ghosts. He believed in boots on the ground, clean cuts, clean exits, and keeping your mouth shut. He bought the house with his war pension and promised Miriam they'd settle somewhere quiet. She wanted a garden. He wanted distance from the world. Elsie hated it the moment they arrived. She said it smelled wrong. Not mildew or mold, but something heavier, like scorched fabric and church incense left too long in a sealed box. Sam didn't say anything. He simply stood in the hallway, staring up at the chandelier, as if waiting for it to fall. The first night, the lights flickered. The second night, the clock stopped. Not just one. Every clock in the house, regardless of battery or age, froze at exactly 2:41 a.m. Thomas replaced the batteries. Ruined the hands. Checked the fuse box. Everything seemed fine. Until the next night, same time. Same freeze. The third night, the hallway mirror cracked clean down the center at the exact same second. No sound. No movement. Just a sudden split, as though the glass had decided it had seen enough. By the end of the week, the humming began. It started in the floors. Vibrational. Like a machine buried far below the foundations, turning on a cycle only the house understood. The hum would begin at 200 a.m., rise to a pulsing H by 2041, then stop. Not fade, not diminish. Just stop, like a switch had been thrown in the bones of the earth. Sam said it made his teeth feel like they were buzzing. Elsie said she could hear words in it. Miriam prayed louder. Thomas said nothing. The villagers noticed first. People who passed by the rectory at night would glance up and stop, confused, unable to explain why their legs suddenly felt heavier. Why they had the sense they were being counted by something behind the curtains. A postman quit after 3 deliveries. He said the letters always felt warm, even in the frost. He said the front door sometimes opened before he knocked. He said he dreamed about the chimney. A mouth exhaling heat in reverse. Inside the house, things shifted, not visibly, but perceptibly. Rooms felt deeper, hallways longer. Elsie complained that her bedroom window now looked out over a wall that hadn't been there before. Sam's toys began to go missing, only to be found hours later, neatly arranged on the attic stairs, in shapes he didn't remember creating. Once, Thomas found a photograph of a man in a uniform he didn't recognize tucked into his shaving kit. The man was smiling. The uniform had no insignia. On the back of the photo was written, in unfamiliar handwriting, "He stayed too long." Miriam became devout. She kept a candle burning in the kitchen 24 hours a day. She refused to eat meat. She refused to say the name of the house. She said that names had power. She said she heard a voice singing through the pipes at night, something that sounded like an old hymn she couldn't quite place. Once, while scrubbing the pantry floor, she found a thin line of salt running the length of the baseboard. No one in the house had put it there. Thomas started waking up with scratches on his arms. Not cuts, scratches. Thin, parallel, measured. He blamed the cat. They didn't have a cat. Elsie drew constantly. Not from inspiration, but compulsion. Page after page of dark figures standing in water. A house reflected upside down in a lake. A boy with no face holding a rope. She said she couldn't stop. That the drawings were already there when she picked up the pencil. Sam began sleepwalking. Always to the same spot, the bricked over cellar door. He would stand there, for minutes at a time, one hand pressed against the wall, his lips moving silently. One night, Thomas tried to pull him away. Sam's hand wouldn't move. Not stuck, not frozen, but resisting as if part of him had sunk into the wall itself. And then, on April 13, 1965, they disappeared. No warning. No sign of struggle. No broken windows. No open doors. Just 4 teacups on the table, still warm. A record player spinning without sound. A kettle boiled dry. In the attic, the model of the house had grown. It now had trees. A garden. And inside, 4 tiny wooden figures, perfectly carved, standing in the hallway. Their faces had been sanded smooth. The police investigation was brief, perfunctory, and entirely inconclusive. There was no evidence of foul play, no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints that didn't belong. The table was set for breakfast, but untouched. The bath was full, lukewarm, as if someone had drawn it and forgotten to get in. Sam's shoes were neatly by the door. Elsie's school books lay open on the kitchen counter. A half-written essay beside a pencil that had rolled onto the floor. Miriam's tea was still hot. Thomas's wallet was still in the drawer. Nothing was stolen. Everything was there, except for them. And something about the house felt wrong. Not in the dramatic, crime scene kind of way, but in the subtle way that made the officers' hands shake slightly when they picked up items, and made them leave quickly, with clipped voices and a sense that something was watching. One constable remarked that the wallpaper in the upstairs bedroom seemed to change color depending on where you stood. Another said he heard what sounded like whispering in the pantry, but it stopped when he opened the door. The photographs in the hallway, old and framed in thick glass, had fogged over on the inside, as if someone had breathed on them from within. Nothing made sense, and nothing could be proven. After weeks of searching, questioning neighbors, combing through records, and retracing every movement the family made before April 13, the police closed the case with 4 words typed coldly at the bottom of the final report. Familo pas human voluntara ad depior. But those who lived in Roxford knew better. They remembered what the house was before it was sold. They remembered the noises in the walls, the strange flickering lights that no electrician could explain, the black mold that spread overnight and then vanished by morning. They remembered the woman who lived there in 1923, who hung herself in the attic, leaving a letter that read only, "They are not mine anymore." They remembered the 3 children who vanished in 1908, whose names had been scrubbed from the town registry, whose graves had no bodies beneath the headstones. The house had taken people before. The Higgins family was just the latest. But what made this disappearance different was what came after. It started with the phone calls, not to the house, but from it. 2 weeks after the investigation ended, the village priest received a call at 4:12 a.m. The line was crackly, distorted. At first he thought it was a prank. But then he heard it, a child's voice, quiet, calm, whispering the words to a hymn no one sang anymore, one that hadn't been printed in any English hymnal since 1849. He hung up. The phone rang again the next night, and the next. He unplugged the line. It still rang. The postmistress found a letter in her sorting bin. No stamp, no return address, no handwriting. Just a single sheet of yellowing paper with 4 names typed on it: Thomas, Miriam, Elsie, Sam. And beneath it, a line. You must remember them. The letter smelled of damp earth and burnt sugar. Children in the village began to speak of a new game. One where they stood outside the old rectory and tried not to blink. The longer they kept their eyes open, the more they claimed to see people behind the windows who shouldn't be there. Curtains moving without wind. A tall figure in the garden watching without a face. One girl said she saw a boy in the upstairs window, with black eyes and a smile that didn't stop. Another boy went missing for 6 hours after going near the front porch. When they found him, curled up beneath the hedge on the other side of town, he was shivering and repeating the phrase, "The house remembers," over and over until his voice broke. A local historian began to dig into the property records. He found something strange. The original plans for the rectory showed a different layout, an entire wing that no longer existed, a library, a sunroom, a narrow staircase that led to a sub-basement. But the current house had no such rooms. He went to inspect it himself and never returned. His notes were found scattered in his office, covered in sketches of a spiral staircase, a window that looked inward, and a symbol that appeared again and again, a circle within a triangle, surrounded by 13 eyes. A week later, a man from the city came to take photographs. He was doing a project on abandoned buildings. He took 12 pictures of the house and left, satisfied. When he developed the film, only one image showed the house. The others were filled with static, streaks of black, or blank white space. In the one image that did come through, 4 figures stood in the upstairs window, backs turned, heads slightly tilted. He never went back. Decades passed. The house remained, weathered, silent, but never truly abandoned. It was as if it existed slightly out of step with the world around it. People forgot it existed until they stood in front of it. Maps occasionally left it out. Birds never landed on its roof. And sometimes, late at night, those passing by on foot would hear something impossible, the ticking of a clock long since broken, or a woman weeping softly from behind the bricks. In 1983, a group of university students attempted to spend the night in the rectory as part of a documentary project. They brought cameras, recorders, and journals. Only one returned. He was found wandering the road 10 miles south, barefoot, eyes red from crying. He would not speak for 6 months. When he finally did, he said only one thing. I think they wanted someone to tell their story. Inside the house, a notebook was found. It belonged to Elsie. The pages were warped, stained, but legible. Each page was covered in drawings. People with no mouths. People with too many eyes. A tree with hands instead of leaves. A house drawn again and again, but each version slightly different. More windows, fewer doors, no roof, or standing upside down. The last page was blank, except for a single sentence scrawled in black ink. You will finish what we started. The house still stands. And the door, they say, is never locked. They say no one owns the Higgins house now. But that's not true. The land registry keeps assigning ownership to people who've never heard of it. A man in Dover received a notice in 1991 saying he owed back taxes on the property. He'd never been to Oxfordshire in his life. A woman in Manchester inherited the deed through a distant uncle she didn't know existed. When she went to visit, she left her car parked at the gate and walked up the long path through the overgrown hedgerow. She returned 13 minutes later. The car door was still open. Her hands were shaking. She never went back. She never spoke of what she saw. Every now and then, the house resets itself. That's what the locals say. It fixes things that were broken, but not in the way people do. Curtains will be freshly drawn, even if the windows are shattered. Cupboards will be closed when the wood is warped and swollen. One neighbor swore she saw the same book lying in the front window for 40 years. Unmoved, open to the same page, even when the storms came and the glass broke. Sometimes, people hear music. Faint piano. Out of tune. Always the same notes repeating. It doesn't come from inside the house. It comes from under it. There are stories about the land before the rectory was built. Stories that were never written down. The kind passed between grandmothers and gravediggers. The kind that change slightly each time they're told, but always end the same way, with a name that should never be spoken aloud. The name doesn't belong to a person. It belongs to a place. Or perhaps to something that still lives there. Something that feeds not on bodies, but on memory, on recognition. Something that waits to be named again so it can come back fully. In 2006, a small team of archivists from the Historical Society tried to catalog the property. They brought equipment to scan for tunnels and hidden rooms. Their instruments glitched. Laptops died. Notes vanished. One of them kept repeating, "The basement is missing." They couldn't explain what they meant. The blueprints showed a cellar. The foundation tests confirmed it. But there was no entrance. No door. Just bricked walls that rang hollow if you knocked. That night, one of the archivists had a dream of a woman kneeling on bare stone in a candlelit room. She was praying, but her mouth was sewn shut. The next morning, he left his job, burned all his notes. He would only say, "They built it on top of something that wasn't dead yet." The figure in the window, the one seen in that old photo of the Higgins family, has been seen since. Not by many. Only those who look long enough. Who linger near the gate just a moment too long. It never moves. It never blinks. It simply stands there, partially obscured by the curtain. Always watching. Some say it's Thomas. Others say it's not any of the Higgins family. That it was always there. That the house wears people like coats. That it mimics them, learns from them, waits until someone recognizes the face, then uses that face to get closer to the next. There was an incident in 2017. A delivery driver took a wrong turn on his route and ended up at the end of the rectory lane. He saw the house. Thought it was a holiday rental. He'd seen something about a guest house listed on his app. He knocked. The door opened. He stepped inside, just into the front hallway. He was found 2 hours later walking in circles through a barley field a mile away, holding a bundle of dried lavender and a photo of a woman no one could identify. He didn't remember getting out of his truck. He didn't remember the house at all. But the audio logs from his vehicle recorded a conversation. One side of it, his side. Short phrases. Quiet, respectful, like a child in confession. "I understand. Yes, I'll wait." She still sings. "No, I don't want to forget." After that, the logs cut to static. No one lives there now. The government listed it as condemned, but the demolition crews never arrive. One firm claimed to have scheduled a teardown in 2020, but the paperwork vanished. The project manager took a leave of absence after saying he heard the words, "Not yet," whispered into his ear while reviewing the satellite photos. There was no one else in the room. Some people think the house is a wound, not a building, not a place, a tear in something deeper. A site where memory and grief and time collapsed inward so violently that the world couldn't repair it. So it covered it up with walls and wallpaper, with bricks and shingles. And every few decades, the wound pulses open again, and someone disappears. But there's another theory, one that's older, harder to trace. They say the house isn't where people disappear. They say it's where people are rewritten. That the Higgins family didn't vanish, that they were remembered wrong. That something inside the house is rewriting the past. Slowly, gently, just enough that no one notices until it's too late. A date changed in a birth record. A photograph that fades around the edges. A journal entry with one extra sentence you don't remember writing. Until the people you loved are unfamiliar. Until your own face in the mirror doesn't quite match the one in your memories. The house doesn't take you all at once. It erases you in layers. And once you're forgotten, you belong to it. There was a man once, his name has been lost, who claimed he remembered the Higgins family when no one else did. Not just from the photo, not from the stories, but from childhood. He said he used to play with Sam. Said they went to the same school. Said he remembered Miriam's perfume, the kind that smelled like violets and warm iron, and Thomas walking to the post each Sunday in a coat 2 sizes too small. He swore he remembered Elsie sketching strange shapes on the backs of hymnals when she thought no one was watching. But when he brought it up at a local council meeting years later, no one believed him. The school records showed no mention of Sam, no desk with his name, no teacher recalled a boy that quiet. The church didn't remember Miriam. The post office had no mail address to the rector after 1964. No baptism. No birth certificate. No school photo. The Higgins family had been erased, not just vanished, deleted, unmade. He grew angry, began collecting evidence, newspaper clippings, a stray letter addressed to M. Higgins, dated March 1965, with a postmark no one could trace. He found a library ledger showing Elsie checked out a book on European folklore just days before the disappearance. The library had no record of the book. The shelf where it lived had no dust. He showed these things to a journalist. The journalist agreed to help. 2 weeks later, she disappeared on her way home. Her last message was a voicemail, 6 seconds of silence, followed by a sharp inhale, and the words, "They're watching through the mirror." The man continued his work alone. He rented a small room above the bakery, covered every wall with notes, photographs, names, dates. He drew maps of the house, guessed at the layout of the missing cellar, compared it to ancient catacomb structures and English pagan ritual spaces. He began writing a book, titled Inheritance of Absence. He claimed the house was a vessel, a kind of spiritual encryption device, built to encode memory into architecture, that certain types of grief could anchor into the wood, into the walls, and echo forward in time. He said the house was full of echoes that hadn't reached us yet. Then he vanished. Not all at once. Slowly. First, he stopped being seen at the bakery. Then, his room was found empty. All his research gone. The walls freshly painted. No forwarding address. No record of a lease. Even the receipts he signed were suddenly blank. The bakery owners didn't remember renting the room. One of them said, "You mean the attic? We never let that space out." Another said, "I thought that room was locked." The only thing left behind was a single photograph pinned to the back of the door. It showed a hallway, wood-paneled, narrow, faintly lit. 4 people stood at the far end. Their faces were blurry, but their outlines were unmistakable. Thomas, Miriam, Elsie, Sam, except their feet weren't touching the floor. They were slightly above it, hovering, tilted, as if caught in the moment of falling upward. After that, no one spoke of the house for years. Not publicly. It sat there behind the hedgerow, surrounded by weeds and fog. Its windows watching the village with a patience that didn't belong to time. But the silence didn't mean peace. It meant pressure. Waiting. Every so often, someone would report a strange dream. Always the same details. Walking into a house they didn't recognize. Climbing a staircase that never ended. Hearing the humming. Seeing a mirror that showed not their reflection, but an older version of themselves. Weeping silently with their mouths sewn shut. Some would wake with nosebleeds. Others with names in their mouths they didn't remember learning. It became a local superstition. "Don't look at the house," parents told children. "Don't speak its name," said the priest. But no one said what the name was. Some claimed it was a Latin phrase carved into the foundation. Others believed it was a prayer long forgotten, one that reversed meaning when spoken backward. But most agreed if you remembered too much about the house, it would remember you back. In 2021, a podcast host decided to cover the story. He was known for ghost tales, urban myths, fringe disappearances. He laughed about the house at first, called it England's own Winchester. He gathered what little evidence he could find, grainy photos, half-erased documents, an audio tape from 1983 that played only static for 20 minutes before a single voice whispered, "I'm not dead, just rearranged." He published the episode. It went viral. Then came the emails, hundreds of them. Listeners from all over the world claiming they'd dreamed of the house before they heard the story, that they knew what it smelled like, that they remembered being inside. Some sent drawings. All showed the same layout: narrow hallways, high ceilings, a cellar door hidden behind a wardrobe, and a mirror in the upstairs hall that always reflected a fifth person. A week later, the host uploaded a bonus episode. He sounded tired, slurred, distant. He said, "There's something under the floor. I heard it move. The house isn't empty. It's full of people who think they're still alive. If I disappear, don't find me. Don't try. I think I'm being rewritten." The episode was deleted 12 hours later. His account vanished. The house waits. That's what they say now. That's what's written on the signpost nailed to the tree across the road from the Higgins property. No one knows who put it there. The words are carved in old wood, painted over in black. The tree has tried to grow around it, but the sign doesn't rot, doesn't fade. The words remain year after year. The house waits, and it listens. There is a theory whispered between archivists, folklorists, and a few who've spent too long studying disappearances that were never truly solved. They call it architectural possession. Not the haunting of a house by a spirit, but the haunting of memory by a place. A building that doesn't trap you physically, but invades the narrative of your life. It weaves itself into your personal history, subtly, quietly, until you remember things that never happened and forget the things that did. It is not the people who live in the house that own it. It is the house that lives inside them. The Higgins case became a quiet obsession for a man named Leonard Wren. He was a former archivist for the Oxfordshire Historical Society, dismissed for forging access requests and keeping unapproved duplicates of parish records. He claimed he wasn't forging anything, only preserving what someone, or something, was trying to erase. He said that history was not written by victors, but by houses like the Higgins Rectory, buildings that outlasted families, churches, governments, that waited for generations to forget the truth so they could write it again. This time without resistance. Leonard found an obituary that didn't belong, published in a 1957 issue of the Roxford Parish paper. It listed the death of Thomas Higgins, beloved husband, father, and groundskeeper. But it made no mention of a war record, and said he was survived by a wife named Catherine, not Miriam. No other records mention this Catherine. No photographs. No marriage license. Leonard believed this was one of many fragments. False pages inserted into the historical record like bacteria in a bloodstream. Agents of confusion meant to dissolve the facts. He compiled a massive binder of materials, letters, family trees, scanned photos, and church records. In the center was a diagram, a sketch of the Higgins house. Not the house as it appeared, but as it had once been. According to Leonard, the structure had changed subtly, impossibly. Rooms realigned, staircases shifted. Windows that didn't exist in one decade appeared in the next. He had mapped reports from dozens of visitors across 70 years. No two described the layout in the same way. He began calling it the living house. He claimed it grew when remembered, shrank when forgotten, and rearranged itself when cornered. He noted that any time new evidence surfaced, it came at a cost. Someone lost a memory, an object vanished, or someone involved simply disappeared. Leonard disappeared in 2009. All that remained was the binder. It was found in a charity shop bin behind the train station. Most of it was water, damaged. The ink bled into illegibility. But a few pages survived. One included a charcoal drawing of a cellar room with a chair facing a wall. There were scratch marks in the stone floor, circular, layered, spiraling inward. In the corner of the page, written sideways in jagged red pencil, were the words, "You sit long enough and it remembers your name." People who enter the house report different things. Some say they only made it as far as the hallway before losing consciousness. Others swear they explored every room and found nothing but dust and old air. A few see people. A child in suspenders sitting on the stairs. A woman in a dark dress humming softly by the window. A man in a doorway with no eyes. But the ones who stay longest often say the same thing afterward. They forgot something. A birthday. The name of their first teacher. How they got home. And more troubling, they start remembering things that never happened. One woman said she had vivid memories of a daughter she never had. Knew her name, her laugh, her favorite toy. But there was no record she'd ever been pregnant. No photos. No medical files. She said the house gave her something in exchange for a truth it took away. That's the pattern. The house trades. Not items. not people. Narratives. It consumes the clean, simple stories, the ones with beginnings, middles, and ends, and replaces them with something open-ended, something uncertain, a lingering hum where there should be silence, a door where no door was, a name you can't stop whispering but don't understand. In 2023, a private investigator named Halford visited the property after a request from a genealogist in New York, who claimed her client was a direct descendant of the Higgins family, through a fifth member never listed in any file. A child named Ruth. No birth certificate, no photos, no mention in police reports. Halford, curious but skeptical, arrived one morning in spring. He was supposed to document the visit. He set up a body camera, a notebook, and a secondary audio recorder clipped to his jacket. He made it inside. The footage was never released publicly, but transcripts exist, leaked by a technician who refused to work with the firm afterward. The video begins as expected. The creak of the front door, a quiet hello. A walk through the front hall lined with peeling floral wallpaper. Dust. The usual. Then the humming starts low, almost like it's coming from the recorder itself. Halford mutters, "Feels like it's under my teeth." He explores the sitting room, the kitchen. Everything in perfect disrepair. As he moves to the stairs, he stops. He says, "There are 5 photos on the wall, 4 people in each. But the faces change when I look away." Silence. Then, there's a name under the 5th one. Ruth, but it's scratched out, scratched into the wall behind the frame. The humming rises. Halford climbs the stairs, turns down the hallway. He stops again. "There's a mirror here," he says, "but I'm not in it." His breathing quickens. The video glitches. When it resumes, Halford is in a small room, one not on any blueprint. Bare walls. One window. A child's chair in the corner. On the wall, someone has written, "If they forget you, you belong to us." He whispers, "There are names in the light. I can see them on the dust." And then the video cuts out. He was found 3 days later, sitting on a train platform hundreds of miles away, holding a photograph of 5 children. Only one matched any known Higgins family member. The others have never been identified. He did not remember being in Oxfordshire. He did not remember who hired him. But he did remember the name Ruth. He said it in his sleep, over and over. Ruth Higgins. She wasn't erased. She was the beginning. There had never been a Ruth Higgins. Not on paper. Not in the photographs. Not in the statements taken by police or the stories told by neighbors. Not even in the dreams of those who remembered the family more clearly than they should have. But after Halford spoke the name, something shifted. Quietly, like a book being turned one page ahead in the dark. Not many noticed. A librarian in Dorset misfiled a parish register and discovered a baptism record for R. Higgins, infant female, dated 1961. The handwriting didn't match any known registrar. The page was written in red ink, not black. There was no mention of parents. No godparents listed. The only marginal note read, "She was not meant to be found." The record disappeared 2 days later. The librarian does not remember filing it, but her dreams became more vivid. She described a child's laughter coming from her attic. She lives in a flat. No attic. She described waking to find her hallway longer than it had been the day before. She couldn't see the end. When she turned to wake her husband, he wasn't there. She couldn't remember if he had ever existed. She found a photograph on her fridge the next day of herself, holding hands with a little girl in a raincoat. Her own handwriting on the back read, "Ruth's first steps." April 14, 1962. She wept, not because she remembered, but because she wanted to. She disappeared 3 weeks later. Left her house unlocked. Left her phone on the table. Left the photograph in the freezer, folded perfectly into quarters, and placed inside a box labeled, "Doopan of Ohuayuish to Ramin." And now, Ruth appears in other places. A gravestone, overgrown and faded, behind the ruins of an old church in Roxford, bears her name. A single line beneath it, "What was given cannot be buried." The stone was not there in 1965. Historical photos prove it. But now it is, and no one questions it. No one tends to it. No one speaks her name aloud in the village anymore. They say it hums in your bones afterward. Some say Ruth never existed in the same way the others did. That she was never born. That she was remembered into being by the house itself. that she was the first one it created entirely from memory. A prototype. A daughter imagined by a house that could no longer bear silence, a story given form. Because what is a ghost truly, but a memory out of place? And what is a haunting if not grief trying to be heard? Elsie, Sam, Miriam and Thomas, they disappeared, yes, but Ruth. She began to appear. On chalkboards, in diaries, in the wrong family trees. Like a stone dropped in a still pond, the ripples began to spread outward. People started remembering her. A woman in Devon insisted she had once seen a young girl named Ruth standing at the side of the road near the rectory in 1965, wearing a yellow coat and holding a stuffed rabbit. She remembered it in vivid detail. The way the child looked up and smiled. The way her eyes seemed too old for her face. The way she said nothing, only pointed toward the chimney, and then vanished. The woman was 7 at the time. She never told anyone. She thought it was a dream. But 50 years later, when she heard Halford's tape, she collapsed. Not from fear, from recognition. Because Ruth had drawn her face once. She found the sketch 2 weeks later in an old tin under her bed. It was yellowed with age, smudged in charcoal, but it was her face. As she looked now, she has no memory of ever drawing it. And on the back was written, "You were kind to me." So the question becomes, what is Ruth? Is she a child that once lived, then vanished with the rest of the Higgins family? Or is she something the house remembered before we did? A draft of grief. A daughter the walls dreamed into being. Because if the house is truly alive, and there's little left to argue otherwise, it may not need to trap people to feed. It may only need to be believed in, and Ruth is the proof of belief. She is not gone. She is becoming. People don't just see Ruth now. They see her before she arrives. They dream of her first. Always the same dream, a long hallway lined with mirrors that do not reflect. A child's voice humming a lullaby in a language no one knows. A flicker of yellow turning the corner just as they wake. Some report waking up with nosebleeds. Others with the faint scent of soot on their pillow. One man described waking with a single word, etched into his windowpane from the inside. Again. A retired reverend from Oxford claimed Ruth came to him in the chapel during a thunderstorm. He said she did not speak. She stood in the aisle, hands clasped in front of her, and simply waited. When he asked her name, she opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She tilted her head. Then he said her name. He didn't know how or why, but it came out without hesitation. Ruth. At once the church bells began to ring, though the ropes were still. The candles blew out. The reverend fell to his knees and wept, though he could not say why. When he looked up, she was gone. 3 days later, he left a note on the altar. She is not a ghost. She is a reminder. He has not been seen since. Some say Ruth is the price of remembering the Higgins family. That for every person who starts to believe in their story again, Ruth becomes more real. She becomes sharper, clearer. She begins to move differently. She begins to smile. She begins to write her own name. There was a therapist who specialized in sleep disorders. She treated a patient who claimed to have recurring dreams about an old house in Roxford. Though he'd never visited England, he described the wallpaper in perfect detail. The sound of the humming. The way the shadows didn't move quite right. She dismissed it as psychological transference. Until she began dreaming of the same house. Of Ruth. Of a staircase that spiraled downward forever. One night, she awoke to find her walls covered in sketches she did not remember drawing. Each one had a phrase written across it. She wants to be real. The patient disappeared 2 weeks later. His apartment was found empty. His calendar, however, had one date circled in red, April 13. Every year, Ruth does not ask to be remembered. She waits. She allows the mind to soften. She allows curiosity to creep in like fog under the door. And once the story begins to unfold in you, you belong to it. The house, too, has changed. It's harder to see now. People walk past it without realizing. Maps update without including it. Photographs blur the structure automatically, as if the software cannot perceive its shape. But those who have been marked, those who've seen Ruth, can always find it again. It calls them back. One man, a taxi driver who once picked up a passenger near the rectory gate, said he didn't notice anything strange until he passed the same hedge 3 times in a row. even though he hadn't turned. The passenger was a little girl in a raincoat. She said nothing. Just smiled in the rearview mirror. Her eyes didn't blink. The fourth time they passed the same hedge, she was gone. The door hadn't opened. The car hadn't stopped. She had simply vanished. He quit driving that night. In the morning, he found a drawing in the back seat, charcoal on yellowed paper. A girl's face, smiling. A house behind her. Underneath, a sentence. She's almost ready. So what happens when Ruth is ready? Some believe she is the final memory the house will give birth to. That once she steps fully into the world, beyond dreams, beyond photographs, the house will no longer need to hold the story. It will collapse. Not physically, but narratively. It will vanish the way a lie vanishes once it is no longer needed. It will become a silence, and Ruth will be all that remains. Not the family, not the records, not the stories. Just the name, spoken aloud by someone who doesn't know where they heard it. Written on the wall in a house they've never visited. Echoing through a phone line that shouldn't be connected. That's the end of the story. Or maybe just the beginning. It doesn't begin with thunder, it begins with forgetting. Not the dramatic, sudden loss of memory, but the slow untethering of details. The kind you don't notice until you need them. Where you put your keys. The name of the street you grew up on. The way your sister used to laugh. That's how the house works when it reaches beyond its own walls. It loosens you. It makes room. Because when Ruth is ready, there must be space in the world for her to enter. And the forgetting spreads. A woman in Scotland begins speaking a language her husband does not recognize. She insists she's never heard it before, but it comes to her in sleep, and she writes it on the walls. The symbols match those found carved beneath the floorboards of the Higgins house. A boy in Brighton draws a house with exact architectural detail that no one taught him. Right down to the placement of a brass key behind a loose brick in the hallway. When asked how he knew, he simply said, "Ruth showed me." The house is becoming more visible to those who have never seen it. More familiar. It has begun appearing in the background of unrelated photographs. A tourist's picture of the Cotswolds shows the roofline in the distance, though no such house exists on the map. A drone video from an amateur landscape filmmaker passes over a patch of land that glitches mid-frame, flickers, skips, and for half a second the frame shows the house pristine, as it was in 1965, smoke rising from the chimney. Then it's gone. These are not accidents. They are invitations. The house is calling its story home. Ruth's name is now etched into the margins of books where it wasn't printed. Typed into spreadsheets where it makes no sense. Spoken aloud by children during sleep. A boy in Canada, 9 years old, recites the names of the Higgins family perfectly, including Ruth. His parents never told him the story. They never knew it. But he describes them as if he met them yesterday. He weeps when he says Ruth's name. He says she is cold. He says she is close. She is close. And the closer she gets, the less the house resembles anything human. Its walls begin to bend in the minds of those who dream it. They dream of rooms that breathe. Of windows that do not show the world outside, but something else. Something watching. They speak of mirrors that reflect only the back of their own heads. Of doors that close without hinges. Of voices that repeat their own thoughts back to them, word for word, 1 second too late. The people who enter now do not leave in the same way. A man found sitting on the roadside near Roxford in April 2024 was barefoot, unshaven, and muttering hymns in reverse. He held a book in his lap that no one could read. Its pages were blank to everyone else. But he said they were full. He said they held her story. He said the house no longer needed bricks. It needed belief. That's the threshold we're crossing now. The edge between a haunting and a religion. Between a curse and a cult. People do not need to step inside the house to be touched by it anymore. They only need to hear the story, to speak the names, to dream the dreams. Because this was never about the Higgins family alone. They were just the first story we failed to forget. And every time we try to remember what happened to them, every time we share their names, every time we speak of Ruth, we feed the house. We let it restructure the past. We let it blur the present. And one day, we won't be able to tell which memories are ours and which belong to it. The house does not want revenge. It wants permanence. And Ruth is how it will survive us. A child without origin. A name without anchor. A story with no ending. She will be seen again. In someone's backyard. At the edge of a park. In the reflection of a car window. In the smile of a stranger on the train. And when she is fully remembered, the house will not be needed anymore. Because Ruth will carry it with her, room by room, person by person, until the world itself becomes her inheritance. And we will forget what came before. You won't notice the first time it happens to you. That's the nature of the forgetting. You'll be speaking with someone, and you'll pause, mid-sentence, because you can't recall their name, even though you've known them for years. You'll walk into a room and forget why you entered. Not because you're distracted, but because the room is wrong. Not just unfamiliar. Wrong. The angles are too tight. The door closes too gently. The light from the window lands in a place it shouldn't, as if the sun has forgotten where to stand. And then hours later, when you're lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, trying to remember what you forgot, you'll whisper a name. Not your own. Not your family's. Hers. You won't know where it came from, but it will taste like ash in your mouth. That's how Ruth enters. Not through the front door, but through the breath. And once she is inside, you will begin to change. Not all at once. The house is never in a hurry, it has time. It always has. First you'll dream of hallways you've never walked. Then the humming will begin. Not always aloud, sometimes in your teeth, behind your eyes, in the soles of your feet. Mirrors will seem deeper. Shadows will lean the wrong way. You'll lose time. Hours. A day, maybe. And when you come back to yourself, there will be new photographs on your phone. Ones you didn't take. A hand on your shoulder. A girl in a yellow coat, walking ahead. It won't feel like fear at first. It will feel like nostalgia. Like a memory of a friend you had long ago. Like something sad and warm and familiar. You'll want to know her. You'll want to protect her. And then you'll want to forget again. Because something in you will scream that you are remembering a lie. And that the lie is becoming real. By then it will be too late. People write the house off as myth, a campfire story, an overgrown ruin with a name that sounds made up. But every once in a while, someone dreams about a girl who isn't there, and wakes to find dirt on their hands, a smear of charcoal on their pillow, a song in their head they can't shake. They write it down. They hum it. They say it aloud. They don't know they're passing it on. The house no longer needs to be visited. It visits you. In every story retold. In every drawing found in a thrift shop. In every floor plan that seems wrong but familiar. In the feeling you get when your child points to an empty hallway and says, "She's here." And if you go looking for proof, you won't find it. Because the house removes itself as you draw closer. Road signs will mislead you. GPS will lose signal. Locals will forget directions. But if you belong to it, if your mind has opened the right way, it will find you. It always does. A filmmaker attempted to document the phenomenon. He had footage, interviews, sketches, diagrams, hours of audio. He was rational, skeptical. Thought it was mass hysteria, collective invention. He traced the myth back to a single village and stood on the steps of the Higgins house. He never went inside. He said the wood of the door felt warm. Too warm for April. As if someone was breathing just behind it, he returned home. Released a teaser trailer for his documentary. 3 days later, the footage corrupted. His team had backups. All blank. Every interviewee forgot what they'd said. Every transcript was gibberish. The filmmaker vanished the night before the full premiere. His voice was found on a cassette tape in his study. Just one sentence. "She asked me to let her in." The last known recording of Ruth's name came from a radio host in northern England who received a handwritten letter postmarked from a city that didn't exist. It included a single Polaroid photo, a child's bedroom. In it, 5 dolls sat in a semicircle facing the closet. One of them had no face. The host described the image live on air. He joked about it, played eerie music over it. Then, he said the name aloud. The signal cut for 13 seconds. When it returned, he apologized, but listeners said his voice had changed. Softer, slower, measured. He never acknowledged the letter again. He left his show 2 weeks later and moved to a cottage near Roxford. No one has seen him since. There's a theory that Ruth never needed the house to be remembered. That she was the one dreaming it. That the house was her vessel, her cocoon. That every wall, every creaking floorboard, every photograph hung crooked, every whisper at 2:41 a.m. all of it was her way of building a body, of being born. And once she was strong enough, once we had remembered her enough, she stepped outside. They say she appeared first in reflections. That's how the crossing began. People reported glimpses in bathroom mirrors, just behind them to the left. Not full appearances. Just the edge of a yellow sleeve. A lock of dark hair. A set of eyes watching without blinking. But when they turned around, there was no one there. Sometimes they'd leave the room and return minutes later, only to find the mirror fogged, as though someone had stood there, breathing. One man found the words, "I'm almost ready," written in the condensation. He didn't remember writing it. He lived alone. Ruth was never loud. She did not scream. She did not run. She waited. That was her nature, patient, soft-spoken. A story that lets you tell it before you realize it is telling you. When the dreams began to spread across continents, people stopped dismissing it as coincidence. Online forums lit up with similar accounts. Photos of unfamiliar children appearing in family albums, entries in diaries no one recalled writing, memories of imaginary friends that suddenly had last names. And always it was Ruth, not always in name, but in presence, in feeling. A constant humming beneath the conscious mind, a slight shift in the shadows, a pressure behind the eyes. Hospitals reported a surge in sleepwalking. Children whispering in their sleep in voices that weren't their own. A boy in Paris built a scale model of a house no one recognized. But when the photo of it was posted online, dozens of people said they'd seen it before, in dreams, in visions, on streets that hadn't existed in decades. The plans matched the Higgins house exactly. Down to the hidden staircase. Down to the bricked cellar. Down to the room that no one ever entered but always knew was there. People began to draw her without knowing they were doing so. A waitress on break, sketching idly on a napkin, traced the shape of a child standing at the edge of a hallway, holding what appeared to be a rabbit made of ash. A man doodling on a train found himself repeating a symbol over and over, a circle within a triangle, surrounded by eyes. When asked why, he simply said, "I think it keeps her calm." What's left of the Higgins house is unremarkable from the road. The hedgerow is thick, and the gate has rusted. The bricks are weathered, and ivy has overgrown the windows. But the air around it hums. Not audibly, but beneath the thoughts, like a memory you didn't live. Those who get too close report dizziness, a sudden awareness of being watched, and the overwhelming urge to say the name, Ruth, aloud, without knowing why. Once they do, it's as if the house exhales. The wind dies, the silence deepens, and something shifts. The house no longer needs its physical form. The structure is just scaffolding for belief. It has already begun rewriting the world outside its walls. In stories, in stray moments of déjà vu, Ruth is no longer just an echo. She is a loop. In 2025, a writer submitted a short story to a magazine. It was rejected. The editor said it was too derivative, too close to an urban legend already circulating. But the writer insisted she hadn't heard of the Higgins case. She claimed the story came to her in a dream. She woke up, walked to her desk, and typed the entire thing without stopping. The story described a family who moved into an old house, a child who didn't belong, and a name carved into the wood that changed every time you blinked. The story ended with a line the writer said, "She didn't remember typing. She is not knocking." Inside, more stories like this began to appear. Not copies, not hoaxes, emergences, symptoms. The narrative had become a virus, moving through stories, drawings, whispered names, passed from one mind to another like a forgotten song returning unbidden. Each telling fed her. Each variation made her more stable. Until one night, a girl in Manchester went missing. Her parents found her shoes on the back step. The garden gate was open. Inside her bedroom, a charcoal sketch hung on the wall, not by her hand, not in her style. It showed the Higgins house, intact, moonlit, the windows glowing, and in front of it stood a small figure in a yellow coat, smiling. Below, written in a tight, childlike scrawl, "She's home." The world begins to forget what it was before she returned. This is not poetic, it is literal. Maps redraw themselves, names slip from registries, buildings disappear from memory. One day there is a street, a school, a church, and the next, it feels as though they were never there. And when someone insists they remember, they are told they're wrong, that they're confused, that nothing was ever built on that land, that there is no record. But they know. Deep in the body, in a place thought and language cannot reach, they know. This is what Ruth is. She is the restoration of a wound long left to rot. She is not death. She is the rehearsal for it, the echo before the fall. She doesn't erase, she replaces. Once a town is touched, its dreams begin to turn inward. People stop traveling. Children are born without birthmarks. A clock tower rings at the wrong hour, then corrects itself as if embarrassed. The number 5 is skipped on doorways. Everyone swears it was always that way. And if someone asks too many questions, if they speak Ruth's name aloud, they vanish not in the moment, but in the past. Photographs change. Records are adjusted. Graves go unmarked. Their names go unspoken, until even their family forgets they ever existed. And yet, she is not cruel. She brings comfort before she consumes, warmth before the cold. People drawn into her wake report a sense of peace, of purpose, as if they have finally remembered something vital, as if they've stepped into the role they were meant to play all along. They stop resisting. They begin to hum. The same melody, the one no one recognizes, yet everyone knows. She visits them in mirrors. She leaves drawings in their coat pockets. She signs letters with no return address. And always, the message is the same. You brought me back. The rectory in Roxford no longer stands. Or it does, but not here. Its foundation is visible in some timelines, buried beneath ivy and nettles. In others it never existed at all, yet its influence persists. It can be seen in places where it never was, echoed in the layout of a house in Iowa, mirrored in the paint color of a tenement flat in Warsaw, whispered in the attic of a row house in Kyoto. The structure is no longer local. It is viral. It has transcended geography. It has embedded itself in the language of memory. We do not need the bricks to remember the walls. We only need the name. And that name now lives everywhere stories are told. Writers who never heard of Ruth before dream her anyway. Filmmakers shoot scenes with no script direction, only to find later they've recreated the interior of the Higgins home down to the wallpaper pattern. A child draws her face on the condensation of a bus window. He says she smiled at him. He says she lives in the space between seconds. You cannot kill what you've already remembered, and you cannot forget what has been remembered too deeply. So now the question is not where she is, it's who you'll be once she's finished becoming. Because Ruth is not complete. She never was. That's why she was created. The house needed a shape for what it couldn't say aloud, for what the village buried, for what the family wouldn't admit. She is the vessel of every silence, every ritual left unfinished, every child who vanished without prayer. She is grief without closure, memory without truth, hunger without mouth. And now, as she walks through us, wearing the memories we fed her, she begins to rewrite the world in her image, not all at once. First, the sky shifts color at sunset. Then, the clocks pause a moment longer than they should. Then, the mirrors reflect the rooms they used to be. Then, a stranger you pass on the street smiles at you too knowingly. And for a moment, you feel like you've come home, though you've never been there before. And you begin to hum. Because Ruth is not coming anymore. She's here, and she's watching. There is no final warning, no flash of light, no sound that signals the end. Just a soft hum behind the walls, a mirror that turns its face away, a page in your journal you didn't write. By now, the house has no floor plan. It has no address. It has no gate. It lives in you. You'll feel it first when you try to explain something simple, a date, a place, your mother's name. And the word doesn't come. You'll think you're tired, distracted. But then you'll see the girl in the yellow coat, just for a second, on the platform across the tracks, at the edge of your hallway. In the corner of your dream. She won't say anything. She never does. You'll wake up and find you've been writing her name over and over on a napkin. You'll find a photograph in your jacket pocket, blurred, out of focus, but unmistakable. The Higgins house at dusk, one light on upstairs. A silhouette standing in the window. You'll remember a story you never heard. A disappearance no one can prove. And a family that never left, even when the world stopped speaking their names. Because this is the trap. Not the house. Not Ruth. The trap is memory. We keep telling ourselves stories to understand the things we've lost. We fold the horror into narrative. We give it structure so we can survive it. But some stories do not want to be told, they want to be remembered. Ruth is that story. Not tragic. Not vengeful. Inevitable. She is the shape of what cannot be undone. She is the echo of every truth we buried in silence. And she no longer needs your belief. She has your name, your reflection, your attention. Your fear. She is not looking for a home anymore. She is building one behind your eyes. And when the humming begins, not in the air, but in your own thoughts, when the mirror no longer shows you, when your photographs begin to change, and when you wake with soot on your hands and forget your own birthday, you'll understand. The Higgins family didn't vanish. They crossed over, and Ruth was the bridge. The world you knew is still here, but beneath it, something older is writing. And it's writing in your voice.